He was doing it alone in the dark, behind closed doors. And I knew I had a choice. Walk away or cross a line that can never be uncrossed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. You know that kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl a little? It was like the walls were holding their breath. So was I. I stood there barefoot in the hallway staring at his door. The light underneath was soft flickering, and all I could hear was the clock ticking and my own heartbeat. I didn't go looking for trouble, I swear I didn't. But when you're lonely enough, silence starts to sound like an invitation. He'd been locking himself in that room night after night. No music, no TV, just darkness. At first, I thought it was grief. I told myself he just needs time, but it went on too long, and that night something felt different. I didn't knock. I didn't speak. I just stood there, one hand on the doorknob, frozen. I wish I could say I walked away, that I turned around and did the right thing. But the truth is, I didn't know what the right thing was anymore, because what do you do when you see your own emptiness reflected in someone else's eyes? I wasn't just checking on him, I was looking for something too. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not love, not lust, just connection, just someone seeing me. And that's the part Noon tells you. It's not always about desire. Sometimes it's about not feeling invisible. I didn't plan for any of it to happen, but something in me changed that night. And once you cross a line like that, you don't get to pretend you're the same person you were before. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever stood at a door unsure whether to open it or walk away, then maybe you'll understand what I did next. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold so you won't miss out on our next story, because this story, it's not easy, but it's real. And it's time I told it. I'm 38, married. On paper, everything looks fine. Nice house, decent car, a husband who makes good money. But inside these walls, it's hollow. My husband, Mark, he's the kind of man who thinks showing up with a paycheck is the same as showing up for a marriage. Always on a plane, always glued to his phone when he's home. Our conversations are more like calendar updates. What bills are due, what's for dinner, when he's leaving again. It didn't used to be like this. There was a time I felt chosen, wanted, but life wore us down. Or maybe he just stopped seeing me, stopped touching me, like I was his wife. And I stopped asking why. I got used to the quiet, the empty side of the bed, the sound of dinner plates, clinking insolence. Then Jay came, his son from a previous marriage, 19. Tall, lean, quiet. He'd been living with his aunt after his mom died. Suddenly a car accident, college, brought him back to our city, and Mark suggested he move in to save money. I didn't object. How could I? It felt like the right thing to do. But, from the moment he stepped through the door, something shifted in the energy of this house. Jake didn't talk much, polite but guarded. He kept to himself. Headphones in, hood up, eyes down. I tried. I really did. Cooked his favorite meals after asking Mark what he used to like. Left notes on the fridge, offered rides. But he never asked for anything. Dinner was the same. Every night Mark barely looked up from his phone. Jake answered questions with onward replies. And me? I smiled through it, tried to pretend the silence wasn't suffocating. Sometimes I'd watch them, both father and son, sitting at the same table, worlds apart, and I'd wonder how a house could be this full and still feel so empty. I'd catch glimpses of Jake walking down the hallway. He moved like a shadow, quiet, heavy, like he was carrying something he didn't want anyone to see. He told myself, I understood him, that maybe in some twisted way we were both grieving something. He lost a mother. I lost a marriage. There were nights when Mark would leave for a week-long trip, and I wouldn't even feel his absence anymore. But Jake's presence lingered. Not loud, not obvious, just there. We'd cross paths in the kitchen late at night, him in his hoodie, me in my robe. He'd nod, I'd smile, and the moment would stretch just long enough to make me feel something I wasn't ready to name. He started doing his laundry without being asked, cleaned up after himself, even asked if I needed help bringing in the groceries once it was small. Barely. Anything. But it felt like more than I'd gotten from Mark in months, and I hated that it mattered. I hated that I started noticing the way his voice dropped when he said, "Thank you." The way he avoided eye contact, but lingered in the same room just a little too long. I'd watch him from the kitchen window sitting on the back porch alone, staring at nothing. I wondered what he was thinking. If he ever felt as invisible as I didn't see him as a child anymore. Not after that first month. Not after I noticed the shape of his jaw, the way his hands had grown into a man's. And I don't know when it happened exactly. But one night, I looked at him and my breath caught in my throat. I used to look at Jake as a child until one night something changed and I wasn't sure if it was him or me. After that night, after I realized something in me had shifted, I tried to pretend it hadn't. I kept cooking, kept folding laundry, kept pretending that everything in this house was normal, but I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. Jake began spending more and more time in his room. He'd skip dinner, lock the door. Sometimes I'd hear faint sounds from behind it, muted voices, the soft flicker of video, the low thump of bass, but mostly silence. At first I let it be. He was 19. He had a lot to deal with. Grief comes in waves, and maybe it's just crashed harder at night. But something about his retreat felt different. It wasn't just sadness, it was avoidance. It was like he was hiding something or hiding from something. One night I passed by his door on my way to bed. The light was on, barely just a soft glow slipping out beneath the door. I paused. Not for long. Just a second too long. And then I heard it. Not voices, not music, but a rhythm. Quick, repetitive. I froze. There was no mistaking it. I didn't mean to intrude. I didn't. But I knocked before I could stop myself. Just a quick, gentle tap, a reflex more than anything. Inside, a scuffle fast. Panicked. Then, the unmistakable. Snap of a laptop, lid slamming shut. A pause. Then his voice. Yeah, I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. My heart faster than it should have been. Hi. Just checking if he wanted anything before bed. A beat. No, I'm good. His voice was steady, but I heard it. That edge of embarrassment of being caught. I didn't open the door. Didn't say another word. Just nodded to myself like he could see me and walked away. But that image, him and there alone doing that, it stayed with me. It should have faded. It should have embarrassed me or made me feel motherly concern. But instead it unsettled me, not because of what he was doing, that part was normal. Expected, he's 19. A boy with hormones and a closed door. But it wasn't the content that bothered me. It was the way he looked at me afterward. At breakfast the next morning, he didn't avoid me. He looked right at me, just for a second. Not in fear, not in guilt, but in something else, something harder to name. Like he wanted me to understand something unspoken. And I did, or maybe I wanted to because I'd felt it too, that pause, that current, that weight in the silence between us. It was no longer just grief or loneliness sitting between me and Jake. It was something else, something dangerous, something real. I wish I could say that morning passed like any other, that I brushed off themament at his door and went on with my day. But the truth is, something had already shifted in me. And once that shift begins, it's hard to stop the landslide. I sat across from Jake. At breakfast. Him with his cereal. Me with my coffee, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the act, but the look. That steady, fleeting eye contact, that quiet, unspoken tension. I hadn't been touched in months. Not kissed, not held, not even grazed by accident. Mark was always busy, always tired, always somewhere else, Mentally or physically, I used to beg for his attention in small ways, wearing a new blouse, cooking his favorite meal, reaching for his hand in bed. Eventually, I stopped trying because nothing is lonelier than reaching for someone who doesn't even flinch, and yet Jake flinched. He noticed me in silence, in subtle shifts of breath and body language. I didn't want it, not at first, but when you've been starving, even a glance can feel like a feast. That week, I caught myself lingering just a little longer than necessary, passing by his door when I knew he was awake, starting small talk. I knew wouldn't go anywhere, just to hear his voice. And at night, I started wearing thinner robes, softer fabrics. I told myself it was summer, too hot for anything heavier. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I wanted to be seen by someone. Even if it was him, I'd walk to the kitchen knowing he could hear my footsteps. I'd bend to get something from a low cabinet, fully aware of the angle. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But the wrongness was tangled up in a need I couldn't name. Curiosity crept in like a slow burn. What if he looked again? What if he wanted to? I told myself I was just being kind, that I was keeping an eye on him, helping him adjust, making sure he didn't feel alone. But my thoughts betrayed me. They weren't motherly. They were messy, hungry, dangerous. Late at night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling. Mark would be turned away from me, already asleep or pretending to be. And I'd think about the light under Jake's door, the tension in his voice when I knocked the way. His eyes flickered when he saw me in the morning. I hated myself for it, but I also didn't. I kept flashing back to younger versions of myself. 17, 22, 25. Always looking for validation from men who offered attention like it was currency. I thought I'd grown. Past that marriage would fix it, anchor me in something secure. But I was still that girl in so many ways. Still chasing something I couldn't hold. And Jake, he didn't ask for any of this. He didn't do anything, but he made me feel like I existed and that was all it took to keep the thoughts alive. I kept telling myself I was just being kind, but late at night, when I replayed that moment in my head, the knock, the pause, the look, I knew it was something else. It started with the smallest things. His glances got longer. He stopped looking away so quickly. At first it was in passing when I walked into the room or when I handed him a plate, but then it became something else. One morning I caught him watching me as I poured my coffee. Not casually, not accidentally, watching like he was memorizing the way I moved. And I didn't stop him. I couldn't. That attention, so soft, so quiet, felt louder than anything I'd heard in years. I told myself I was imagining it. But then came the touches. He brushed past me. In the hallway light, intentional. His hand grazed my waist once when we both reached for the same dish. It lingered just a second too long. Neither of us spoke about it, but we didn't need to. The silence between us had grown heavy loaded. One evening, Mark had left again for another conference. Jake and I were home alone. I offered to put on a movie. It felt harmless enough. A blanket on the couch, 2 bowls of popcorn, a comedy we both half-watched, and somewhere in the middle, Jake shifted closer. He rested his head on my lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it had always been that way. My heart nearly stopped. My hands froze. But then I looked down and saw the way. His eyes closed, the way his breathing slowed, and I couldn't help myself. My fingers moved through his hair gently, tentatively, then down to his shoulder, his chest. Just barely. Just enough. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just lay there, letting me trace the line between what was innocent and what wasn't. And when I realized where my hand was, how far it had wandered, I jerked it back. Shame flushed through me like fire. But when Jake sat up and looked at me, there was no judgment in his eyes, no fear, no anger, just that same quiet understanding. That same unspoken, "I see you," I had felt from him Before I told myself it couldn't happen again that I had to put distance between us. But the house was so quiet, and I was so tired of pretending I wasn't starving. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen still in my robe, still shaking off the night, before Jake was already there, shirtless leaning against the counter pouring cereal like it was any other day. He didn't cover up, didn't flinch. His eyes met mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. He said, "Good morning," like he wasn't half naked like. My heart wasn't pounding like my hands hadn't been on him the night before I turned away, but I felt his gaze on my back, and it stayed there. The tension between us grew unbearable after that. Every interaction was charged. When we passed in the hallway, when we sat at the same table, even when we didn't speak, something hung between us like a thread, pulled too tight. I'd catch him watching me from the corner of his eye. And sometimes I watched him too. It wasn't agamy. It wasn't playful. It was raw, real-like. We both knew we were teetering on a line we couldn't unwalk. I should have put a stop to it. I should have drawn, A-line slammed a door, screamed anything. But I didn't, because for the first time in years I didn't feel invisible. And that kind of feeling, it's addicting. Then one evening, the power went out. The whole house went dark. No hum from the fridge, no glow from the hallway lights. Just shadows and silence. I lit a candle, walked into the living room barefoot, holding my breath. Jake was already there sitting, on the couch, waiting. He didn't say a word. And what happened in that darkness changed everything. The storm outside had rolled in quietly. The kind that doesn't roar but creeps. A soft rumble in the distance, a flicker of lightning across the kitchen window, and then darkness. The power blinked out all at once. The hum of appliances stopped. The house exhaled, and I stood in it, barefoot, holding a candle, barely breathing. I moved through the hallway, like I was floating, room by room. I listened not for danger, but for him. I found him in the living room. Jake was kneeling by the coffee table, lighting a candle with a match from the drawer. His face glowed in the soft flicker. He looked older in the shadows, or maybe just more real. He turned, saw me, and for a long second, we just stared. No words, no masks. I stepped closer. He didn't move. He just watched me, the candlelight dancing in his eyes. I sat across from him, not too close. Not far enough, and then he said it. "I hate this house when it's quiet." His voice was low. "Careful." I nodded. "I do too." He lit another candle. Then, another 3. Little flames glowing between us. He looked up again. "It's not just the quiet. It's the way it feels, like no one's here, even when they are swallowed hard." Yeah. I know that feeling. We sat in it. That truth, that emptiness. The rain started tapping against the windows, soft but steady. He leaned back, resting against the couch. His legs stretched out in front of him. "I think about her a lot," he said. "My mom?" I looked at him, and something in my chest tightened. "She loved you," I whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, but she wasn't happy." "No," really, his eyes met mine again. "Neither are you." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out because he was right, and somehow it hurt more to hear it from him than from anyone else. He looked down. "You ever feel like people look right through you?" I closed my eyes for a second. "I feel like that every day." And then it happened. He reached across the space between us. His hand just resting on mine, warm, gentle. I didn't pull away. I should have, but I didn't. We both stared at that small point of contact, his thumb brushing slowly over my skin. I looked up. So did he. And there was something there. Grief, hunger, need. Our faces were close, closer than they should have been. And when our lips met, it wasn't fast, it wasn't rushed. It was slow, uncertain. It was a question neither of us knew how to ask out loud. I felt his breath against mine, his hesitation, his ache. We pulled apart for a second, stared, breathed. He whispered, "I don't want to be alone anymore." And I didn't stop him. If you've ever stood at the edge of right and wrong, you'll understand what came next. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. There's more to uncover. The next morning was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was thick, awkward-like. The air itself didn't know what to do with us. I didn't hear Jake in the kitchen. Didn't hear the usual creak off his door opening. No sound of the shower. No footsteps, just silence pressing in from all sides. I stayed in my room longer than usual, tried to busy myself, folding laundry that didn't need folding, making a bed already made. But my body remembered every detail. His breath, his voice, the weight of that moment. We created one we could never unmake. Finally stepped out into the hallway bracing. Myself. But his door was closed locked. Maybe I didn't knock, I couldn't. I went through the motions that day, made, coffee, cleaned up dishes. No one used, opened the windows to let in air. I couldn't seem to breathe. Around noon, I heard the front door open. Mark was home. He was supposed to be gone 2 more days, but there he was, setting his suitcase by, the door mumbling something about canceled meetings and a storm delay. I felt sick, not just from fear of being found out, but from the weight of the lie I was now living. Jake didn't come out of his room. Even when Mark called his name, tried to make conversation through the door, Jake stayed silent. Cold, distant. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Is he all right?" Shrugged Syed, something about college stress, the storm needing space. I don't think Mark believed me, but he didn't. Press, that night at dinner, it was just the 2 of us. Jake didn't come down. Mark didn't seem too bothered. He barely looked. Up from his phone, just shoveled food into his mouth like nothing had changed. But everything had. Everything I couldn't eat. Every bite turned to ash in my mouth. My skin felt too tight. My heart too loud. I told myself to be normal, to breathe, to blink, to exist. But my body remembered in guilt. It doesn't always come in a scream. Sometimes it's a whisper, a slow, aching pulse that never lets up. Days passed. Jake stayed in his room. He avoided me. I avoided him. The few times we crossed paths, his eyes didn't meet mine. His shoulders were tense, jaw clenched, and the space that once buzzed with quiet possibility now throbbed with discomfort. I missed him, and I hated myself for that, too. One night, late, maybe past, midnight, I passed by his door again. I heard it. Not the soft flicker of a screen. Not movement, but crying. Low choked. I froze. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. Instead, I whispered barely, loud enough to carry through the wood, "I'm sorry." I don't know if he heard me. Maybe. I hoped he didn't. But then, just as I turned to walk away, his door flung open. His eyes were red, tear-streaked, angry. He looked at me like I had ripped something out of him. And he said just one sentence before slamming his door shut. "You said I wasn't alone." I couldn't sleep after that night. After Jake's words slammed into me, harder than the door he shut in my face, "You said I wasn't alone." And maybe that's the part that hurt the most, because I meant it in my own way. I really meant it. But what I gave him wasn't comfort. It wasn't stability. It wasn't love, not the kind that heals. It was something broken, wrapped in warmth and confusion. And now, the silence between us felt permanent. I kept walking through the house like a ghost cleaning already clean. Counters folding clothes that weren't mine. Mark didn't notice the difference, he never did. He thought we were fine. Some nights I would lie awake next to him wondering if I should just tell him, rip it off like a bandage. Let the truth pour out and destroy whatever was left between us. Other nights I'd stare at the ceiling and imagine packing a bag, walking out the front door, disappearing, but neither happened. I was frozen, too afraid to speak. too ashamed to leave. What kind of woman am I to crave affection so deeply that I would steal it from someone already broken? That question haunted me. It echoed inside me louder than any storm ever could. I started having flashbacks, not of Jake, not even of that night, but of myself. Younger, smaller, hiding behind doors, waiting for anyone to ask how I was doing. I remembered my father, always gone. My mother, always angry. I learned early that love came with conditions and silence was safer than honesty. So I became good at pretending, smiling through pain, laughing when I wanted to scream. And somewhere along the way, I started chasing the same kind of love. I was raised around distant cold full of holes. Jake, he wasn't just a boy. He was a mirror. He reflected all the pieces of me I had spent years trying to bury, and maybe that's what made it so dangerous. Was it love? I don't know. Maybe it was just two wounds leaning on each other, hoping the weight would feel like comfort. One afternoon, while Mark was out, I sat down with a pen and paper. No distractions, no excuses. I wrote a letter. I wrote everything, every moment, every mistake, every feeling I had no right to. Feel I cried while I wrote it. The kind of crying that leaves you hollow. And when I finished, I sealed it in an envelope. I placed it in the drawer beside our bed, and there it stayed, because I didn't have the courage to hand it to him to destroy what little illusion we had left, but I couldn't throw it away either. It was the truest thing I had ever written, and I couldn't even say it out loud. This is the part of my story I'm still haunted by. The Partone replay in my head when the house is quiet, when the lights are low, when Noon's asking questions and I'm left alone with the answers. I've never spoken out loud. I don't know if I should have stopped it or if I was ever strong enough to. Sometimes I wonder if strength would have looked like walking away or finally being honest about how empty it felt inside. It's hard to say, because when love blurs its lines, when comfort and craving get tangled, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between being wanted and just being seen. Have you ever been in a moment like that, where right and wrong felt like shadows shifting in a room you couldn't escape? If you've ever been lonely enough to mistake attention for affection, if you've ever made a choice you couldn't undo just because you needed to feel something, please share in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. What should I have done? Your words matter. Sometimes stories like this, stories buried in shame, need a place to breathe. And if you're still listening, still here with me, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, because the stories we carry deserve to be heard. Even the messy ones, even the ones we're afraid to say out loud. Not every secret deserves to be buried, but some are too dangerous to speak aloud. What happened that night? What passed between Jake and me? It didn't end in fire or fury. There was no dramatic explosion, no confession, no consequences we could see, but something inside us changed quietly, permanently. I never looked at me the same again, and too couldn't look at myself the same. Either, love isn't always pure, it isn't always gentle. Sometimes it comes from wounds, not warmth. Sometimes it's born from the deepest corners of loneliness, the kind that furs when no one notices you're fading. And the loneliest hearts, they make the most reckless choices. I don't know if I'll ever tell Mark, or if Jake will ever forgive me, or if I'll ever forgive myself. But I know this, I carry it every day. Not as a badge, but as a bruise, a quiet reminder that the heart doesn't always know the difference between what heals and what hurts. Maybe forgiveness isn't something we seek from others, but something we spend a lifetime earning from ourselves.